Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really thrilled to welcome back to Newnham architectural historian and alumna, Dr Kathryn Ferry. Kathryn's no stranger to college, having been here herself. I won't say years because never say years. Kathryn also wrote a wonderful piece for us in Country Life for our 150th anniversary, all about architecture and the Queen Anne style. So she's going to talk more about all of that now. So without further ado, okay, welcome.
Right, thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Given that I am an alumna, I think it's worth noting that actually when I chose to apply to Newnham, it was on the basis of the buildings. I didn't know at that point that such a thing as architectural history even existed, that I could study architectural history. I came as a history student, and it was whilst I was here that I discovered that wonderful thing. So I kind of owe quite a lot to Newnham on that score. And I am going to discuss this afternoon some of most of the buildings in a bit more detail. So I've got lots of nice pictures for you. And then, of course, you can go and see the actual buildings outside. But giving you some pointers of sort of where to look for some of these things, because although you can say that all of these buildings by Champneys are in the Queen Anne style, that style evolved over the time that he was working here. He worked here for more than 30 years. As we heard this morning, that is quite an unusual thing for an architect to be working on the same set of buildings for the same clients for that duration. And as a professional, the architectural ideas were changing over that time. His ideas changed, and we see that in the building. So I'm going to go chronologically because that is the necessary way to understand all of that. So let us start with our anniversary building, Newnham Hall. It became quite clear early on that offering Cambridge lectures for women wasn't enough in itself. They had to have to make these lectures accessible to the broadest number of women. They needed to have some accommodation near the lecture site in Cambridge. And so we have Regent Street, we have Merton Hall, but there is this requirement for this house of residence. And so this is the first published view of Newnham Hall from September 1874. Champneys had submitted his designs in February of that year. Excuse the 5p piece, I pinched this one off the internet. But there it is, as an architectural drawing, very much the building as it was built. And let's meet the people involved. In almost every architectural history, professional and personal networks are very important. We know that Champneys was a Cambridge man. He'd read classics at Trinity before training with the architect Pritchard of Llandaff. He knew Henry Sidgwick, Newnham's founder, from his undergraduate days. And I think it's clear that their friendship did influence his employment. Of course, at that point, there was no chance of employing a female architect. And we're going to hear a little bit about that in the next lecture, I think. But I do want to introduce you to this lady, Mary Ann Ewart, because Champneys' first letters to the Newnham Building Committee were addressed to her. And I think that's quite important. She was the granddaughter of a successful Liverpool merchant and the daughter of the Liberal MP William Ewart. She supported the cause for women's lectures, personally gave £1,000 to the Newnham Building Hall Fund. It's a lot of money. That she was interested and knowledgeable about architecture is also clear from the fact that she was among the earliest members to join the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. That was founded by the leaders of the arts and crafts movement, William Morris and Philip Webb, in 1877. 6 years later, Mary Ann commissioned her friend Philip Webb to design her own house at Coneyhurst in Surrey. So I think Mary Ann Ewart's expertise was clearly sufficient to make her an influential voice in the building committee, and that she shared Champneys' avant-garde vision was important because, you know, it wasn't a given. There were plenty of other architects that they could have gone to. We had a reference this morning to Girton, and so I am going to give you the compare and contrast. here. Girton's founder, Emily Davis, would contemplate no other course than that of women challenging men on equal terms. That meant studying for the same honours courses and taking the same preliminary examinations based on the classics. And at Girton, it was Alfred Waterhouse that was commissioned to design the college, and he sort of churned out this institutional red brick Gothic for which he was famed. The facades are pointed, they're quite severe. There's no concession to femininity that was either requested or supplied. Henry Sidgwick belonged to the next generation, and he took the view that women were starting from a different place than men. Their levels of secondary education were generally far lower, not from their own choice. So their experience at Cambridge should recognise that fact. He placed his faith, as he put it, not in his own brand or scheme of education, but education as the instrument for liberating the mind to think its own thoughts. So the architectural backdrop to that education ought therefore to be liberating too. And I think that the different educational philosophies of Davies and Sidgwick are writ large in the bricks of their college buildings. We've heard a bit about the board schools this morning as well. And on the left is the building that Champneys designed before Newnham, the Harwood Road Board School in Fulham. It is demolished now. Built in a 17th century vernacular style with the shaped gables and large windows with multiple small panes that became so evocative of the late Queen Anne style. And also do look at the chimneys here. I think you've seen those before. The Queen Anne label, as we've discussed, doesn't mean that buildings were inspired only by architecture from the relatively short reign of Queen Anne. It was really defined by the use of homegrown domestic precedents from the 17th and 18th centuries. And as we've heard, Champneys actually made his own studies of these. So this was one of the buildings, Peacock School at Rye, that he published an article about in 1874. So, you know, the confluence of the dates there is important. So we've got the red brick, the small panes, windows, the Flemish gables, and importantly, Queen Anne was chosen as the official style of the London board schools. Now, there's 3 reasons why that's relevant for Newnham. It gave Queen Anne immediate credibility for an educational establishment wishing to shake off the sort of public school associations of Gothic. It didn't have any religious connotations. Sidgwick was agnostic. Many of his backers, including First Principal Miss Clough, were northern nonconformists. So no chapel was ever part of the Newnham plan. That's not to say that students weren't expected to go to church. They were, unless they had a rational reason not to. But all denominations were welcome. Also, women were allowed to vote on the school board. So there was already an inclusivity within that was appropriate to Newnham. And we have seen this picture before, but it's such a wonderful building. I'll show it again. The single red brick block of Newnham Hall was 4 stories high, and it sort of announced its presence on the outskirts of Cambridge, but I think with an elegance of a 17th century country house, a kind of mixture, and a precedent for that here, a feel of sort of Kew Palace. Maybe? The shape of the broken pediment above the main entrance is a conceit borrowed from that same period as well, of the 1630s. So the main entrance is here, but it isn't loud in any way. You know, it's quite unprepossessing, and that's conscious, so that it doesn't feel like an institution or intimidating in any way. Because many of the women coming to live here would have been moving away from home for the first time. And college promoters knew that there was some social anxiety around this. Students had to be chaperoned to lectures. They were required to avoid male undergraduates for fear of a scandal that could easily derail the whole experiment. So when Champneys' architecture is described as domestic, it is with good reason. This was meant to feel home-like. But I don't want you to get the impression that this was a sort of cozy throwback, because I think the architects working in this style, as we've heard earlier, were absolutely cutting edge. It's easy now to be kind of immune to the pairing of red brick and white windows because it's so common in sort of suburban and urban architecture. But for the Victorians, it would have felt quite brash and modern. Here's an illustration from Harper's Bazaar of 1877 inside, and you can see there's the entrance door and students walking in the grounds. The plan we've heard about was a departure too, in the way that the sort of traditional Oxbridge sets were rejected in favour of single study bedrooms off corridors. Each room had its own fireplace, as you can see. On the ground floor, we have the dining room now, and the Barbara White room with the service spaces for cook and housekeeper. So each hall has to be understood in the early days, certainly, as a self-sufficient entity, and that was how the site developed. Second hall, now Sidgwick, also needs to be understood then as a detached building. The entrance front it's a kind of more squat version of its predecessor, a story lower, but then 2 bays wider. The end bays, which strike backwards, it's a sort of U-shaped plan, project under the shaped gables, but Champneys is playing with scale here because we've got 3 stories here and 2 stories here. So, you know, you have to look at the sort of finer details of this. Beautiful Venetian windows here, giving it that sort of sense of grandeur on the wings where you have the hall and the teaching spaces, I think. The entrance here, it's still not grand, is it? But it's protected by a porch held up on 4 oversized console brackets, these things, which sort of gives it a bit of extra substance. And it was a trick that other architects of the period, including Philip Webb, used to good effect. And it helps to give the building a kind of solidity. The ornamental details in the gables lend it a finer Baroque quality. And I think if, I should say in brackets, male scholars have tended to sort of read it as an excessive femininity, conflating the style with its end users, those students would surely have resented any accusation that they or their buildings were not serious. They very much were. So we've seen how the plan changed over time. I couldn't understand when I was a student here about the backs, which are now the fronts, because of Sidgwick Avenue. You get this is rather boring back of Sidgwick, and in fact it didn't even have a back to start with. And it's because of where the road was. So there was this public byway coming through the site, so that's Old Hall, Sidgwick here, and they were divided by this roadway, and you can see that very clearly in this picture we've already seen, but I like this one of 1881 because we've got the horses and carriages going past in the front of the building, so it makes it absolutely clear that this is on a thoroughfare, so should be understood, although we are lucky enough to have this elevation facing into the gardens now, it was very much designed to be seen. So we think of it as being part of this intimate enclosed space. That's not how it was designed. So the fact that we have all this ornamental detail should be understood in that way. And here's a rather lovely lantern slide showing a notable feature on the roof here is the white painted wooden balustrade that runs above the attic dormers and between the evenly spaced chimneys. David Watkin, when he was writing his book about Basil Champneys, dismissed these balconies as rather useless. But rooftop playgrounds characterise many London board schools, offering safe spaces for outdoor exercise. And Jemima Clough was certainly in favour of open-air teaching. And I think you also have to remember that Cambridge is a relatively unruly place at this time. And of course views, I suppose. But we know that Basil Champneys was fond of this device anyway, because he did use it on his own home. It's quite difficult to see, but there, between the chimneys there is this balustraded element. And in 1872, when he built this house for the artist Henry Holiday, also in Hampstead, you've got the sort of rooftop balcony element there as well. So he wasn't just using it for that kind of board school connections. He actually liked it, I think, for its own right. So now on to the third hall. So this dates from the end of the 1880s, and it's the one in which architectural historian Mark Girouard said Newnham's Queen Anne reached its peak of delicate prettiness and Matthew Arnold sweetness. So it's named Clough for the first principal, and you have to think of her as the principal client here at Newnham as well. And she had a continuing requirement for ample natural light throughout the college. And so it's very pertinent that the hall with the most natural light should be named after her, I think. There are two elements of this. It's not the best photo, but I chose it simply because you can see how you've got the hall and then the living spaces. It's quite an elongated building. And this is the residential part of it, and absolutely the most decorative. So we've got terracotta finials accentuating the roofline. We've got pediments broken just for the fun of it. The windows appear in a wealth of bays, orioles. There's the circle windows down here. You know, when you actually start looking, there's an awful lot to it. It's relatively busy, but it is very well handled. Go and stand in front of it later and just look at it all, admire it all. The facade of the dining hall features beautiful rubbed brickwork. You see these swags here. They're made of the same brick as the wall, and the pointing is so impressive here that you can barely see the joins between the bricks. It's highly skilled work by these craftsmen and deserves, you know, really to be celebrated. The oriel windows are also superb, and here they are by comparison with Trinity. And I think it is these oriel windows, the pair of them, that make the building the most striking one on the site, because these windows project to almost 3/4 of their circumference. They almost appear to be detached from the wall. Now, it is a long-established Oxford tradition, following on from the form of medieval great halls, that an exterior bay or oriel is used to reveal the location of the high table. So if you're in Trinity, you know absolutely that this is where the high table is. But in Newnham, is it there or is it there? That's Champneys kind of subverting that tradition and suggesting that there's a sort of liberal equality among the diners in the room, really. And inside, it's so light. It's not just those orioles. You've got these 3 round-headed windows as well. And the decoration is pale, classical pilasters and swags beneath this high barrel vault with the NC monogram throughout. It's consciously a really big contrast to the sort of dark panelled interiors found elsewhere in Cambridge dining halls. This one, the Girton dining hall isn't from the same first scheme, so this is still a sort of continuation in the Waterhouse family of that same Gothic mode. It's 1900, so Newnham already has its hall, but they didn't obviously pay any attention to that, and they went all dark and, can I say gloomy? I might say gloomy. So here we have the plan as it is in 1890. So we've got Old Hall, and then Sidgwick seen behind, and then Clough, and we've still got this road here. So the important thing now is to get rid of the road, isn't it? And that's what happens after long discussions with financial support from the Balfour Millions, that is Eleanor Sidgwick, her family money. In 1891, the borough authorities agreed to close a path and make a new road called Sidgwick Avenue, so behind Sidgwick Hall. So for the first time, Newnham is in command of its whole domain, and that allows for the layout of the gardens that are pretty much in the same form that they were designed at that point. Architecturally, of course, it's now possible to enclose the site and provide the sort of showpiece entrance that puts Newnham on a par with much older colleges. So the Pfeiffer building dates from 1892 to 3, and it's erected across that road to be this grand entrance. And Champneys was paying homage to the great Cambridge gates of Trinity and St John's, as you can see here, but as is often the case, he does it with a bit of a twist, because these are very symmetrical buildings, these two gatehouses. If you look at this, it's not. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and you've got a little section of Œil de Boeuf windows there. You've got a bit of extra decoration there. So he's sort of using the basic form, but actually doing something a bit more different, a bit more interesting with it. And we have talked about how the buildings next to this were replaced, but I was very interested to see the form of these. This is the sort of connecting element that goes, and the corridor, I think, here goes to, you can see it on the plan there, goes to Sidgwick. And this is very, very domestic. You know, it looks like some kind of old house butting up to this arch, and it looks as if it's got this sort of oriel on it here, potentially with some sort of pargeting or something. It's almost as if he's trying to create this fantasy of this gatehouse being there a long time and sort of being squashed in against these old buildings, very much in a sort of vernacular tradition that architects were using at the time. And yet, on the other side, the garden elevation, we do have this very symmetrical look. So he's sort of playing around with all these ideas, which I think is rather nice. These bits were part of the section projected for demolition by Elizabeth Scott and then demolished in the 1940s. But I'd like to see pictures of those because they look as if they might be sort of rather interesting. And the gates, of course, the following year after the arch was completed, the bronze gates were put in, dedicated to the memory of Miss Clough, described by David Watkin as these great monuments of the arts and crafts movement made by Thomas Elsey, a metalworker of Great Portland Street in London. They have this fantastic sinuous Greek acanthus foliage, and the two central gates are bordered by stylized sunflowers. You can see them here, but here is a close-up. The sunflowers very much in evidence along here. And these were apparently Miss Clough's favourite flower, but the sunflower is also an easily recognisable symbol of the aesthetic movement so popular at the time. And I give you Oscar Wilde as a sunflower from Punch. The movement was known by its credo of art for art's sake, and that is Punch's take on that idea. A strand of the movement revolved around what was called art at home, an attempt by designers and writers to foster better taste among middle-class purchasers, and such people might well aspire to live in a Queen Anne-style house. So the two things sort of went hand in hand, and very much can be seen these sort of aesthetic interiors at Newnham of the time, the sort of oriental rugs, the cranes, the sort of Japanism of the time that was very popular, and the art pottery that was also a thing, and this bamboo ware very much in style, and some more sunflowers. So these are Thomas Jekyll's sunflower andirons in the catalogue, and actually this is in the Peacock Room by James Abbott McNeill Whistler in Washington. But also they just appear in architectural form as well. So these ones are in Bedford Park, which is a sort of wonderful Queen Anne suburb that's really early on in the development of Queen Anne style. But if you go round the sort of far end of Clough, you will see high up here a sunflower in between these windows. So go and look out for that. Quite pleased when I spotted that one. The library then is the last 19th century structure for the, following a donation from Mr. and Mrs. Yates Thompson. Because female students weren't admitted to the university library on the same terms as men until 1923. You had to have a male undergraduate sign your borrower's slip for you. It's quite reticent on the outside. It doesn't announce its presence here. I mean, you have to really know that it's there, don't you? Because it's all about the interior. The central space surmounted again by this barrel vault lit by huge round-headed windows. So very much in the same vein as the Sidgwick Hall, this library the strap work in the ceiling on this Wedgwood blue background is absolutely beautiful. And modern additions to the library then take that as their starting point. So we've discussed both of these. The Catherine Stevens Rare Books Library, which was built in 1982, but was deemed important enough to be Grade 2 listed in 2018. And you know, that's a very short window in between construction and listing. So that tells you how significant this is considered to be. And the award-winning addition to the main library here by John Miller and Partners in 2004. So you've got that barrel vault again, and you've got the colours, that sort of sensitivity to Champneys' original design. Run through the last ones, but we're getting towards the sort of end of the main building programme. 1906, Champneys is back again to design 2 further halls. Kennedy in 1906, which is for academic staff, fellows and research students. This does have a front to the street now, because of course we have Sidgwick Avenue there, so that's why this is it looks more interesting from that road elevation. But I had never been in Kennedy until I was doing a tour for this Country Life article. I had no idea that it had this sort of oval light well right in the centre of it. So I'm putting that in case other people haven't been in Kennedy and might be interested to see it. And then lastly, the Champneys building. So he's been working with the college for now 3.5 decades. This is 1910. And I think this really is such an evocation of the sort of evolution of his style over that period and the style in general, because the ratio of wall to window here has altered significantly. And that also changes the colour balance, doesn't it? From being very red brick, we're now very white on the windows. And I'm just going to give you a couple of comparisons here. This more window than wall idea. And I like the fact, of course, that this is Bess of Hardwick, Feisty Bess, who's the patron of Hardwick Hall. The Orangery at Kew as well, by William Chambers. Was Champneys picking up on these things? I don't know, but I mean, they're good precedents. And just came across this postcard image of all the windows open and that sense of light and air circulating through the building struck me as rather interesting. So I'm just going to finish with 2 further buildings, because I know we've heard about the whole site, but I'm just picking up on, just to say about the changes in the ornament over this time. So Clough is really sort of plastic, and all the ornament is very much, it comes out to greet you, whereas in Peel it's much flatter, it's more restrained. You have some of the same elements. You've got these curls here, but they're much deeper here, and everything is just sort of a bit more pared down by the time you get to Peel. So you can see as you move around the site how these ideas and how Champneys' views are changing and style is moving forward. And that also is visible in the staircases. Just to say, this one is Sidgwick, Pfeiffer, and this is Peel, which is much more generous. So he's giving much more space to these circulation spaces by the time he gets to Peel. Almost, whereas this is quite classical, this is more sort of almost abstracted and a bit sort of Jugendstil in these balustrades. So that's another, so the evolution of style isn't just on the outside, it's in the inside as well. I'm going to come to Fawcett. Basil Champneys died in 1935, but of course the college is continually needing to expand, and it was possible now to employ a female architect. And here she is. I'll show you another picture of her in a moment. But I think this is a good building, and I think it should be celebrated, because I think the use of grey brick here makes clear that this isn't a pastiche. It's a new building. You know, it's quite clearly marking that out. The red stripes, though, suggest the sort of pilasters that we've got on here. So we've got the flat brick here, and the way that the building is sort of carved up by these pilasters is still carried through into this new wing. And the Flemish gable here, of course, we had to have that, but it's shorn of all ornament, isn't it? And the oriel window there is just plain stone, very crisp. So using the same sort of vocabulary, but in a modern form. Here is Miss Elizabeth Scott in a rather wonderful hat that she wore for the opening ceremony, that was performed by Queen Mary. who apparently had been in Cambridge only recently on one of her antique shopping trips, which I thought was a lovely detail. So it says here, Miss Scott won the competition for designing the new Shakespeare Memorial Theatre, Stratford-on-Avon, and that was her big launch, really. And these are buildings of that. This is Miss Scott here, giving the key to the Prince of Wales of this fantastic memorial building. She belonged to the famous architectural dynasty that we've heard about, great niece of Sir George Gilbert Scott, second cousin of Giles Gilbert Scott, architect of Liverpool Cathedral, Cambridge University Library and Battersea Power Station. So she won this commission for the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre in 1928 and was the first woman to ever win a major commission in open competition. And there's a quote on the theatre's website, says she was the only woman in a field of more than 70. She was still too young to vote, that is, she was 29. Yet 3 eminent architects, 2 English, 1 American, had picked her to design one of England's most prestigious public buildings. The press went mad. Girl architect beats men. Unknown girl leaps to fame. Doctor's daughter, and more in a similar vein. She was indeed the daughter of a doctor from Bournemouth. In March 1928, she was the guest of honour at a dinner hosted by the Junior Council of the London and National Society for Women's Service, where the chair, Miss Ethel Watt, said that she hoped in the future Miss Scott would be known as a gifted architect and not as a gifted woman architect. At the same dinner, though, I was really interested to read that Miss Philippa Strachey, sister of then principal of Newnham, Purnell Strachey, proposed the toast to the memory of William Shakespeare. So clearly they're moving in the same circles. And I think it would be really fascinating to do a bit more research about Scott's contribution to Newnham. I am going to indulge myself because you'll read in my biography that I spent a lot of time working on seaside history. So Otto talked about car parks. I'm going to give you a pier because I can, because this pier theatre was a post-war addition by Elizabeth Scott. And I think this was the building that was chosen to illustrate her work in the passports. If you've got one of the passports with the Elizabeth Scott in, this is the building. And this is the incredible, pardon me. This is the incredible ceiling in the cafe at the end. So as a bit of a counterpoint to Fawcett, this is her post-war work. She was born in Bournemouth. She went back to Bournemouth after the war and she worked for the Bournemouth Architects Department. So I'm just throwing that in for interest's sake. And I'm going to end with Strachey, much maligned, because that is where I spent my first year. And I don't think it was that bad. And I do think, Christopher Grillet was a Cambridge lecturer and co-founder of architects firm Lister, Grillet and Harding, very active in Cambridge and Oxford during the 70s. And that is a kind of phase that is being sort of obliterated now. And okay, there are very good reasons for that, but maybe we should just kind of take stock of what was there. And I couldn't find very much about that period. So I think it's worth just, acknowledging that. And I think, in the sort of the red brickness and in the way that the windows and there is a sort of Champney there is something, it was thought out. It's not just another 1960s, 70s block. So I think we need to acknowledge that. And it's all part of the Newnham story, isn't it? So I think that is me done. Thank you very much.